Let's start off a chapter on probability by just discussing the idea of what probability is. Most likely, probably, you are good at using probability, but not that good at understanding what it really means. So, for example, classic probability, I've got here a penny. If I flip it and I want to talk about the probability of getting heads, well, it's 50%. But why 50%? 50% of what? It's not 50% of this penny. I'm not going to chop the penny in half. It's 50% of the choices, but only one thing happens at a time. When I flip this coin, there's only one thing that happens. There's not two outcomes, right? So people know it's 50-50 because there's heads or tails. But 50-50 probability doesn't actually talk about this penny. It talks about these pennies. This is what the probability was talking about. See all these pennies here? All over my floor? Guess what I'm going to be doing for the next 10 minutes while the camera's off? Okay, probability does not talk about what happens to a penny. It talks about what happens to 100 million pennies, infinitely many pennies. The idea of flipping pennies. That's what probability talks about. So probability does count as some sort of abstract term which we use in concrete ways. Now the reason that's important is because later we're going to be using probability to talk about a statistic which we have done, and I'm going to emphasize over and over, once it's done, there's nothing probability to talk about anymore. One statistic isn't what probability is for. Probability is to talk about the idea of statistics in general. So the vocabulary does matter here, okay? Let's put up a couple rules of probabilities. If there's something that you know will not happen, like, I don't know, a tasty recipe for mushrooms, the probability for that is 0. 0 means it can't happen. If there's something that absolutely will happen, like me picking up all the pennies off my office floor by myself, probability of that is going to be 1. Stuff that might happen, meaning there's still randomness left in the future. That randomness comes from our choice. That is going to be probability between 0 and 1. I should put equals because it could be equal to 0 or equal to 1. Okay? So why is there randomness? It's because we're going to pick a sample. Who we randomly select in that sample comes from our choice, which is random. What's the probability that the average will be 2, or the probability the average will be 5? These are the kind of questions we're going to be able to answer from this. So let's get some rules for discrete probabilities.